Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings here on Now TV. Hey, I appreciate so much you being with me every Friday morning, 9:30 Central Time. It means an awful lot to me. And don't forget, I asked you on last week's program, if you watch this program, and look, I don't care if you agree, I don't care if you disagree. As a matter of fact, if you disagree, I'd love to hear from you and to know why. All right? It's always good to interact together. Proverbs says that the first man to speak always sounds convincing until the second man speaks. So it's good for us to have dialogue even when we disagree with one another. And all of my life, all of my ministerial life, has been involved in dialoguing with people who disagree. And yet we come to common agreement very, very, very often. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people contact me and say, look, Don, I've got to tell you, I began listening to you because somebody told me, man, you got to check out this guy. He's crazy. And I listened to you for a time or two, and I thought you were crazy. So I thought I would study. I thought I'd dig into what you're saying just to prove you wrong. And yet now, they are firm advocates of fulfilled eschatology. I mean, look, I can't even tell you the number of people that has happened with. And so I welcome disagreement as long as it's honorable, as long as it is with Christian decorum and mutual respect, and what have you. So please go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and on the contact button, just click it and say, hey, Don, I've been watching you on Now TV. You made the following comment, and I just simply do not agree with that. Or, hey, just say, hey, Don, man, I love your program. I've been watching it. It's been challenging to me, helping change my life. And believe you me, folks, I get tons of comments from people, especially on my YouTube channel. You can go to YouTube, just type in Don K. Preston Morning Musings. How creative, huh? And I have videos there. I have been involved now for over 200, almost 300 videos on the Olivet Discourse. And look, they're all free of charge. You can go there and you can subscribe to my channel. And you can all automatically get notifications. And I produce videos normally 4 to 5 times a week. And once again, it's free of charge. Won't cost you a dime. Just go there and click on it, watch those videos, and you're allowed to make comments. Again, decorum, respect, decency. And I'd love to hear from you, okay? All right. Well, look, I hope, I do hope that you're safe during the midst of the continuing spread of the COVID virus. I hope that you're taking the proper precautions. I happen to believe in the necessity for what I call the community immunity. Historically, all down through the stream of time, anytime a disease cropped up, it may take a horrific toll, but over a period of time, the human body has an incredible ability to create immunity. And that immunity spreads. And before you know it, the virus disappears. Scientists are still somewhat baffled by that. But it is an absolute truth of history, has been shown over and over and over again. All right, I want to get right into our text because we are continuing our study of the challenge of Christ. And look, I've got to tell you, I have been challenged over the last several weeks by several different people claiming Jesus did not keep his word. He said he was going to come in the glory of the Father with his angels and reward every man according to his works. And he said, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. I think it's real clear we don't have any 2,000-year-old people running around in our world today, right? I think you'd agree with me on that. Well, that means that either Jesus kept his word and he came in judgment in that generation, or he failed. The people I have interacted with over the last few weeks say he failed. He is a false prophet. He was a liar. He was deluded. He just simply failed. The apostles who followed in his footsteps and who repeated his predictions were likewise deluded. They were likewise failures. And therefore, we can just take the Bible and we can chunk it right out the window. And I want to tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, and I want you to listen to me very carefully. I want you to catch the power of this. No futurist paradigm has an appropriate biblical defense to that challenge of Christ. Because people try to say, oh, well, yeah, it sounds like Jesus was predicting his coming was going to happen in the first century, but that's not what it really means. Folks, look, words could not be clearer. Scholars, Greek scholars, know the language is unambiguous. It is explicit. It is unambiguous. Any and all attempts to mitigate the force of some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom are theological inventions. They are contrived. They are fake. They are false. Only the preterist view, the fulfilled view of those passages do any justice whatsoever to what the Bible has to say. So, what I've been sharing with you is, okay, follow me along. This is reiteration. This will catch us up to speed again. All right? Those who see the problem in Matthew 16, 27 and 28 and the other passages, they often appeal to the transfiguration. And they say, see, the transfiguration is the fulfillment of Jesus' prediction to come back in that lifetime. Well, in the first place, the transfiguration was not Christ coming in his kingdom in the judgment of all men. It was a vision of that future coming, but Jesus didn't say, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see a vision of the Son of Man coming. It's not what he said. Furthermore, Peter, in 2 Peter chapter 1, draws directly on the transfiguration for his defense of the yet future to him coming of the Lord, because he refers right back to the mountain and the time when they saw Jesus transfigured before them, and the voice saying, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Him hear." So Peter was appealing to the transfiguration as a vision of what was for him still the yet future coming of the Lord in his kingdom. Remember, that's what it was. It was a vision of Christ coming in his kingdom. Very, very quickly, let me remind you, we are constantly told that Christ's coming with his angels in judgment and in the kingdom takes place at the end of time. But once again, just as a hurried reiteration here, does the transfiguration present to us a vision of the end of time? Does it present to us a vision of the destruction of heaven and earth? Literal, physical heaven and earth? No. The vision of the transfiguration was a vision of the end of the old covenant world of Moses and the prophets, and the transcendent glory of Christ and the new covenant. That's what the transfiguration envisioned, folks. It's right there. Well, Peter said, in his defense of the second coming of Christ, of the coming of Christ in judgment with his angels in the kingdom, he said, 2 Peter chapter 3, knowing this first, that scoffers will come in the last days. Now remember, he tells us in 2 Peter chapter 3, 1 and 2, that what he was saying here was a reiteration of what the Old Testament prophets foretold. So the Old Testament prophets foretold the coming of scoffers in the last days. Now, this tells us a couple of things, and I'm going back over territory that we've covered, but I want to keep this information in front of your minds because it's so critical to understand the actual context of what Peter is saying. Peter's doctrine of the day of the Lord is from the Old Testament. Peter's doctrine of the coming of scoffers in the last days is from the Old Testament. What that means is that those scoffers were to come in Israel's last days because Peter was talking about the fulfillment of the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32, which was a prediction of Israel's last days. You follow that? If you have any questions about that, go to my website, donkpreston.com, BibleProphecy.com, and send me a question. Say, Don, I'm not sure I follow your crochet, your points here. And some people might say, and some people do say from time to time, Don, you're just throwing so much stuff out there. You go from point A, B, C, D, E, F. That's right, I do. Because each one of those points is part of the overall story of the Christian narrative of eschatology. Here's the problem, and I'm only going to mention this ever so briefly. The problem is that many, I would almost say most, many Christians want their Christian theology in 25 words or less. They want their eschatology in 25 words or less. But I'm sorry, folks, that's not the way the Bible works. The Bible was written well over 2,000 years ago. It was written by Jews to Hebrews about Hebraic promises that had to be fulfilled before the world could enter into the salvation that was fulfilled in Israel and her promises. If you and I do not understand the nature of Hebraic language, as I've shared with you, what does the language of in the glory of the Father mean? If we do not understand that language, and if we automatically think, well, 5'5" Jewish man's coming out of heaven riding on a literal cloud with lots and lots of angels, we have overlooked, we have ignored, or we have actually distorted the nature of Hebraic apocalyptic language. That language was never intended to be taken literally. All right, we need to move on. Boy, time gets away so fast. All right, so I have shared with you from the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 28 specifically, which foretold scoffers coming in the last days, denying the day of the Lord, denying the coming destruction of creation. Does that sound like 2 Peter chapter 3 to you? Well, of course it is. Now, when would the scoffers come? They would come in the day in which the Lord says, behold, I lay in Zion a foundation stone, a tried cornerstone, a precious cornerstone. The one who trusts in it will not be ashamed or will not make haste. In other words, they won't have anything to fear. Well, let me ask you, when was that chief cornerstone laid? You know who the chief cornerstone was, don't you? It was Jesus Christ. Peter in Acts chapter 4, 11 and following quotes from the Old Testament prophecies. Psalms 118, the stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. And he says Jesus himself was the living chief cornerstone of the Messianic temple. When was that stone laid? It was 2,000 years ago. Now, since the scoffers would deny and reject the chief cornerstone, that means that the scoffers that Peter is talking about in 2 Peter chapter 3 appeared 2,000 years ago. In other words, you and I are not still looking for the scoffers to come in our day. We're not looking for the scoffers to come in some yet future far off generation. The scoffers have already come. They're not future. And by the way, in a future study, you can just kind of make a mental note here and put a check by it. We're going to be examining in future videos, we're going to be examining the book of Jude in comparison with Peter, 2 Peter chapters 2 and 3 especially. Because in 2 Peter chapter 2 and 3, Peter said the scoffers are coming, the false teachers are coming, they're going to come before the great day of the Lord, and the Lord is going to destroy them at his coming. Well, guess what? In the book of Jude, Jude says, I want to remind you of what Peter said, or what the apostle said. And folks, they're already here, Jude said. What? So Peter said, I want to tell you, pardon me, in the last days the scoffers are going to come. Jude said, remember what the apostle said, because what they predicted is happening now. That's in Jude's day, 2,000 years ago. Jude was not looking 2,000 years off into the future. That means Peter wasn't looking far off 2,000 years in the future. Okay? So we know when the scoffers were to appear. We know when they appeared. Now look, folks, what this means is, since Peter tells us that the day of the Lord would be in the last days, and the scoffers would appear in those very same last days and deny that, and since that is what Isaiah predicted, and what Isaiah predicted was foretold for the last days and was fulfilled 2,000 years ago, folks, that should tell us the day of the Lord of 2 Peter chapter 3 was fulfilled 2,000 years ago. Are we going to say that the scoffers foretold by Isaiah appeared 2,000 years ago, but that the day of the Lord, which they were denying, hasn't yet come? Folks, the scoffers were to be signs of that great and terrible day of the Lord. There is an absolute temporal connection between the appearance of the scoffers and the coming of the Lord. There is no temporal disconnect. I mean, after all, let's face it. A sign indicates something. And a sign doesn't indicate something that's 2,000 years removed. If you see a stop sign, you know that you're supposed to stop real soon, right? It's not a stop that is 45 miles down the road. It's a sign of something imminent. So the scoffers were to be the sign of the imminent coming soon day of the Lord. That's why Peter said in 1 Peter chapter 4 that Christ was ready to judge the living and the dead. He said the end of all things has drawn near, and he said the time has come for the judgment to begin. That's 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 5, verse 7, and verse 17. I mean, could language be any clearer? All right, so here are the scoffers in Isaiah chapter 28. They would appear in the days in which the foundation stone would be laid. We know that they appeared in the last days in the first century. But the Lord warned them, do not be scoffers, because the Lord will rise up at Perizim and at Gibeon. Now, I spent last week sharing with you that coming of the Lord at Perizim, that coming of the Lord at Gibeon, very clearly was not an end of time, earth burning, cosmos destroying event in which every human being who had ever died was raised from the dead. You know that. I mean, listen, that's easy to know, isn't it? And yet the Lord came in those events, and here is the Lord saying in Isaiah chapter 28, and remember, Isaiah 28 is a prediction of the day of the Lord of 2 Peter chapter 3. You got to catch that. So here is the Lord in Isaiah chapter 28 predicting the day of the Lord like the day of the Lord of 1 Chronicles chapter 14, like the day of the Lord of Judges chapter 5. Okay. Since the day of the Lord of 1 Chronicles 14, Judges 5, and 2 Samuel chapter 5, which is parallel to 1 Chronicles. Since that day of the Lord in those texts was not an earth-burning, time-ending event, but the day of the Lord of Isaiah 28 is the day of the Lord being foretold in 2 Peter chapter 3. A day of the Lord like the day of the Lord of 1 Chronicles, 1 Samuel, Judges. Then that means that the day of the Lord of 2 Peter chapter 3 was not to be an earth-burning, time-ending event, as so many commentators say. Look, folks, the only way we can escape this is to simply deny any connection between 2 Peter 3 and Isaiah chapter 28. But remember, Peter said the Old Testament prophets foretold the scoffers. Isaiah chapter 28 foretold the scoffers who would come denying the day of the Lord. And as we're about to see, those scoffers would deny the coming day of the Lord for the destruction of creation. Exactly like 2 Peter chapter 3. But I'm sorry, folks, we cannot overlook and we cannot deny these connections. In order to make 2 Peter chapter 3 something radically different from what Isaiah 28 foretold, we have to be able to prove that yes, Peter said that he was predicting and recalling what Isaiah 28 said. And yes, it may be true that what Isaiah foretold was not an earth-burning, time-ending event, but Peter is speaking of an earth-burning, time-ending event. So where's the proof of that? Where is the proof? Now, as I've covered that, I want to look at verse 22 of Isaiah chapter 22 and following again as we close today's show. Now therefore, now remember, he just predicted in verse 20 and 21, he's just predicted the day of the Lord. A day of the Lord like Perizim, like Gibeon, but that day of the Lord in both of those cases was not an earth-burning day of the Lord. So here's the prediction of the day of the Lord. Remember now, 2 Peter chapter 3 is predicting the same kind of coming as foretold by Isaiah 28. Okay? So immediately following the prediction of the day of the Lord, as at Perizim, as at Gibeon, he says, now therefore do not be scoffers, lest your bonds be made strong. For I have heard from the Lord God of hosts a destruction that is determined even upon the whole earth. Folks, can we fail to see the connection with 2 Peter chapter 3? Isaiah 28. The coming of scoffers, scoffers who would deny the coming of the Lord, who would deny a coming destruction. Peter said his prediction of the day of the Lord when the, quote, earth and the elements therein shall be burned up, unquote, was foretold in the Old Testament, which even foretold the scoffers who would deny that day. So we have Isaiah 28 and we have 2 Peter chapter 3, a point by point by point comparison and parallel. How do we change the subject from Isaiah 28 to 2 Peter 3? How do we change the nature of the day of the Lord from Isaiah 28, a description of a day of the Lord like at Perizim, like at Gibeon, which, to reiterate, was clearly not, those events were clearly not days of the Lord to put an end to time or destroy material creation. The Lord was going to come. However, there's something abundantly strange here. I want to go back to verse 21, and I'm running out of time, so I got to hurry. The Lord will rise up as at Mount Perizim. He will be angry as in the valley of Gibeon, that he may do his work, his awesome work, and bring to pass his act, his unusual act. Now, wait a minute. Here's something you absolutely got to catch. And the commentators agree on this. Even John Calvin agreed with this. Now, in 1 Chronicles 14 and in Judges, the Lord came for the aid and in the assistance of Israel. David and Israel were being invaded by the Philistines in 1 Chronicles 14. The Israelites were battling the Amorites in Judges 5. I'm sorry, that's Joshua 10. I don't know why I say Judges 5. Anyway, so the Lord came to their aid. But now, at the coming of the Lord that is being predicted here, it's an unusual thing, which means it would not be for Israel, it would be against Israel. And folks, we'll have to pick this up again next week. I'll see you then.